Welcome to 5 and 5 from the One-Stop Co-op Shop, where I discuss 5 key elements of a game in about 5 minutes. I'm Michael Kelly, and today I'm looking at Enchanters, a game of tableau building and drafting and combat. And a quick thank you to Mythic Games for sending me a review copy of this one. I'm used to mostly giant games with tons of miniatures from Mythic, like Solomon Kane that I recently covered. So a quick playing competitive card game with solo and co-op added on sounded a bit odd. How does it work out? Let's find out and get to the list. So my first point, number 5, is going to be a pro, and that's the fact that you have all of these decks, especially if you get to the Ultimate Edition, which is what they sent me, and you can mix and match them to totally change up which monsters you'll face and also which cards you can add to your tableau to kind of increase your abilities. And I really appreciate the variety in these decks. They each have some key theme or mechanic that is unique to them. Some add entirely different tokens or entirely different keywords, but it all works pretty smoothly, nothing too tough to keep track of. But we are going down to a mix for my number 4, which is focused on the solo and co-op, and specifically the opposition you face when playing in those modes. So the first positive here is that both modes run very smoothly. You have a deck for each, and you draw a single card at the beginning of each turn or set of turns in co-op. And besides those simple effects, in co-op play, which you can also do multi-handed solo, you have this great variety of overlords, each with different effects, kind of keyed to the variety of decks I've already mentioned, that will make each game play a little differently, even have unique cards in the AI decks sometimes. But on the negative side, and this is something that'll come up more later, neither opposition feels fully fleshed out. In solo, it's just removing cards from the offer, the market basically, and that's really all it does. And in co-op, it can be a little too swingy if a ton of monsters come out early or a ton of items. It can really make the balance change pretty drastically. And we are sticking right with that mix at number 3, which is the journey and rest mechanic. And I want to say, kind of like my number 4, this is another point that's sort of brought down by how solo and co-op works. Because in the basic game, journeying or resting are your two choices on your turn, and it's super smooth. You either take a card from the market offer, or you rest and gain some kind of benefit discarding the leftmost card. Works really well. The problem solo and co-op is not as interesting, bringing it down into kind of a mix, whereas the choices are really good in competitive, is that when good item and enchantment cards, the two you use to upgrade your tableau, are on the left in the cheapest spots, there's no real reason not to take them. In competitive, you have competition, like I might want that card on the 3 or the 4 spot and be willing to pay extra to get it, but there's not much incentive to do that in solo co-op, so it makes the choices not as interesting. And this all leads to my only full-on con for the game, number 2, which is that the solo and co-op, while it does work pretty well, all feels kind of grafted on to what is, in my opinion, a pretty wonderful competitive experience. Going back to my earlier points, some cards and decks don't work as well, some of the choices aren't as interesting, the gameplay is swingier. There are, simply put, a lot of great elements in the game that just don't function to their fullest in these modes. But with that being said, let's get to my number 1, which is a full-on pro, because this is great in competitive play and it stays that way in solo co-op, really something that elevates those modes in the game. And that's the core mix this game has of drafting and tableau building, because you've got these 3 piles, your items, your enchantments, and the monsters you've defeated, and each of them can have icons on the top and the bottom, and also special abilities in the middle. But whenever you get a new card for a given pile, you cover up the top icons and the middle effects, so you have these really cool mixes of abilities, and you want to sometimes buy things or not buy things because you want great bonuses to stick around, or some cards will have penalties and you want to cover them up as quickly as possible. And I'll admit that solo and co-op are still a lot of fun because of this core mechanic, which is just so great. So overall, I want to say I was super surprised by Enchanters. I wasn't sure what to expect, but man, is this game a blast for competitive play. Fully recommended. I know this is the one-stop co-op shop, but really check this one out. It's got really cool card mechanics, tons of variety, great stuff to try out. On the other hand, if you're only looking at this one for solo and co-op, it's still pretty fun because the core gameplay is really good, but true solo is lacking a lot of the competitive spirit of the game, so it becomes a somewhat more rote kind of beat your score experience. And co-op can be super swingy, especially at high player counts. I probably wouldn't recommend it with more than 2, so they aren't the game's best look. Competitive is awesome, solo co-op is a nice bonus, but not the game's main selling point. And if you want to see the co-op game in action with 2 experiences, both a solo multi-handed play that went really well, and some cooperative plays from the streaming channel that did not go well, kind of showing up both swings of the game, check out the links that just popped up. Good gaming, and I'll see you at the next stop.